Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
Series 12 of the Plant-Based Podcast is sponsored by People, Plants, Wellbeing. This is the place where you can find your magic through the power of plants and nature. Relax at a nature immersive retreat, wellness day, forest bathing walk, or why not contact the studio about a tailored team day for your work colleagues' wellbeing. Later in the episode, we'll be giving you an exclusive discount code for all podcast listeners, and this can be used for money off People, Plants, Wellbeing services. Find out more about Nature-Based Wellbeing Studio at peopleplantswellbeing.com or on Instagram under People, Plants, Wellbeing. Hey guys, today on the podcast we have Simon Crawford. He works in the development unit at Burpee Europe Limited, and he's quite the authority on tomatoes. In fact, a couple of years ago, he even helped to put on a display at Chelsea Flower Show, which celebrated 10 tomatoes that changed the world. So we've got him on the podcast today to delve more into this big, red, juicy fruit. So I'm looking forward to this one. Hi.
Welcome to the podcast, Simon. I'd love to hear more about these big, red, juicy fruits. Can you start by giving our listeners a kind of bit of a history about your career and how you came to be doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, my background is very much a plant breeding and genetics background, and I started plant breeding with a focus on tomatoes in 1978, I'm afraid. So, it's quite a while ago now. And from there, I've worked in many different crops, and I've moved between research and marketing and general company management. So, but always involved in the seed industry, one way or another.
Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a passion of yours then. Can I just say 1978 was the year I was born, and then you said quite a long time ago.
I knew she'd have to tell us.
And then when you said that's quite a long time ago, I thought, that just made me sound really old, quite a long time ago.
I'm sorry about that, Ellen. No, it's only yesterday, isn't it, really?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So, Simon, I've known you for many years through my work at Thompson & Morgan, but can you tell us a little bit about Burpee Europe and kind of the top line about what the company does and the fact that they do indeed specialise in vegetables and tomatoes specifically?
Well, the Burpee Europe was started in 2012 by myself with the idea of selling Burpee raised bread items in Europe. If you like, it was a return to Europe because Burpee has had a long history of supplying seeds into the European market and buying seeds from Europe to sell in the US. It was just an opportunity that I saw, and after some discussions with the owners in Philadelphia, we decided we would set up breeding, start to make some sales, and I would start to do some breeding mainly on tomatoes. And then after 5-6 years, we bought a property in the Netherlands, and a friend of mine came aboard to do breeding work in the Netherlands, and I focused on the commercial side of the business. And since then, we've grown and expanded and introduced, a not insignificant number of varieties.
Because Burpee is a very established brand as well. Let's just explain to listeners kind of how long Burpee's been around as a company.
Yeah, 1876. The company was started by Attlee Burpee. First and foremost as an animal breeding company, shipping young animals out west at the end of the 19th century, and then he saw an opportunity to supply seeds in packets to settlers who were moving out towards California, and the business grew from there.
Wow, that's amazing. What an incredible history, to be part of that.
Yeah, it is. And they have a fantastic number of varieties, heirloom and then new varieties that are gaining popularity both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, tomatoes are basically in our diet every day. Pretty much everyone eats tomatoes, and they're in so many things. But I think it would be amazing, like we started with the history of you and Burpee, but let's start with the history of the tomato plant. Like, how was it first discovered?
Well, it was the Spanish conquistadors that really brought the fruits back to Spain, and then they moved to Italy. And of course, there's a rather unpleasant side to it, because it was Cortés and his conquistadors that essentially took over the Aztec lands in Mexico and brought fruit back from there. The actual center of origin for tomato is according to a lot of research that's gone on, botanical research that's gone on, is in the region of Colombia and Ecuador. But somehow, and we're really not sure how, the fruit found its way into Mexico and was utilized in Mexico. And the sort of diversity that was found by the conquistadors and reported on by the Jesuit missionaries who were with Cortés and started to settle in Mexico after the conquest, is incredible diversity of fruit shape, of fruit size and colors. The Aztecs would grow in hydroculture as well, on rafts on the lakes where they lived. So they would have, if you like, allotments where they would grow tomatoes, and then they would use them in their diet extensively, from what reports I've seen. The first recorded image of a tomato is on the doors of Pisa Cathedral in Italy, and this was an image that was probably taken from fruits that were introduced into Italy via the Medicis. The Medicis were presented with fruit and were growing them in their properties in the middle of the 16th century. So you're talking about early 16th century, the tomatoes are discovered in Mexico, and by 20, 30 years later, they're being used in Europe. But they were never seen as a food crop initially, even though they knew they were being used as a food crop in Mexico. They were seen more as an ornamental plant. People didn't really see them as a very attractive fruit.
And at what point did they then kind of wake up to it and realize this is something that could become a commercial crop in that case?
Yeah, I think people in the Western world were or let's say in our hemisphere and Northern Europe specifically, they were worried about being poisoned, Michael. I think that was the biggest problem. They saw these things as a potential threat. And I mean, it's a very strange story, this, because there was a fellow called Colonel Johnson who decided he was going to prove to the general population in New Jersey that tomatoes weren't poisonous, and took the drastic decision to eat a bucketful on the steps of Salem Courthouse in the 1840s to show that he would survive. But I think he owned land in New Jersey and decided that he could grow tomatoes profitably as a commercial crop. And after proving that, the crop did start to develop, and through the 19th century in the States, the crop began to grow and expand dramatically. And the similar story can be told of the European market, particularly for the Italians and the French market. I think in the north, us northerners were still a little bit suspect of the tomato, and I don't think we really got to grips with it as a potential interesting food crop until probably the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. I think people saw it as a cure. People made pills out of tomatoes as a kind of a salve for certain illnesses. But no one really had picked it up in the north to use for a food crop. I think tomatoes were grown on large estates. Head gardeners knew how to grow them, and there would be a curiosity. And slowly but surely, probably those head gardeners would then take seeds out to friends in the community, and other people would start to grow them. But it was I think it was, between the middle of the 16th century and the end of the 19th century, there you have probably 150, 200 years of tomatoes just, if you like, lingering and nothing major happening with them.
It's amazing, really, isn't it? Just to think how, like, the journey of the tomato, like now, home it's kind of like one of the top crops that people grow at home if they have an allotment or a kitchen garden, or even like in a hanging basket. Or, tomatoes are all over social media nowadays as well. It's like such a big thing to grow all the different varieties of tomatoes. But actually, it's relatively new, isn't it? With regards to home growing, that is.
Yeah, I'd say probably in the UK, 120 years probably of any significance. You can see seed companies. I don't know, the seed catalogues I've looked at, once you go back into the 1920s, even you start to see a number of varieties being offered. But how many people were actually growing them, I'm really not sure. And the end of the 19th century, there really weren't too many varieties that were available. The breeding really started in the US, I think, significantly, and then in Italy and France. But I think we were slow coming to the party in many ways, with taking the fruit and developing them further.
Just before we move on, I want to pick up on something you said a moment ago about when they first saw tomatoes, they were starting to use them for ailments and illnesses.
Yes.
What were they using them for? And why is the tomato not used now as a medicine, if you see what I mean?
I'm not sure whether it was some kind of a quack cure or something, but clearly they felt that tomato had some curative properties in some way. And you do see, some advertising. I mean, a tomato hasn't got a huge, I have to say, it hasn't at the moment, as things stand, it hasn't got a huge nutritional value. It's, yes, you've got lots of vitamin C and you've got lots of lycopene, which is a very good antioxidant, and some lutein, which again is a very good antioxidant. But outside of that, Michael, there isn't a huge amount of medicinal property within a tomato. So it's an interesting one that they came to that, and I suppose they soon got over it. But if you look back at some of the catalogues from the, if you like, the late 19th, early 20th century, you'll see these, tomato pills for sale and the rest of it. So
really,
it's an interesting little side branch, if you like, on the history of the tomato. But we may come back to that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, because there are changes in the way we're looking at tomatoes now, and maybe they do have some properties that we could, develop further from a dietary point of view, health point of view.
I think next I'd like to do a real comparison of like the very early tomatoes that we've talked about when tomato was first discovered and how they look today and what has changed in between. Obviously, they taste better than they did originally. Are those plants now more disease resistant? Kind of how does the first tomato compare to those that we now grow today?
Yeah, I think it's been a very long road, and I think we've seen, step by step, huge increases in uniformity of fruit, shape of fruit, size of fruit, depending on the market. From your experiences of traveling around Europe, there's a very, very different tomato in Eastern Europe or Southern Europe compared to our traditional, 45, 50 gram spherical fruit. And so there's been a focus on that. Whereas my understanding of what the tomato looked like originally in the 16th century was a very diverse mixture of different types, heavily ribbed, not ribbed, large, medium, small. And there was, everyone, I guess, had their favorite. But the developments were, it takes time, and particularly with techniques where you were really only selecting on the visible characteristics of the plant. You didn't really understand the genetics. Certainly through the end of the 19th century, there was no, prior to the publication of Mendel's results and the understanding of Mendel's laws, there was really very little understanding of how these things were inherited. But we might take this diversity does make this conversation, in many ways difficult. But if we took one example, let's take one example, the San Marzano tomato from Italy, heavily selected on a volcanic soil in southern Italy, in Calabria, and it came from some other historic varieties, two plum varieties, smaller plum varieties, King Umberto and Fiascella, and also Fiascetta, and they developed the San Marzano from that for canning. So you had a very, long fruit, thick fruit walls, and it would can easily, so that, you had this process going on right when the variety was introduced in the 20s, probably been going on for 25 or 30 years through the early part of the 20th century. And out of that came this new variety, which has had a huge following. And that particular type, of course, for soup, sauces and processing has been an incredible development. And you could go on and pick out other specific varieties where we've seen huge improvements in disease resistance to viruses, fungal root diseases like Fusarium, or leaf diseases like Cladosporium, for example. So yeah, I mean, it's the changes in the last 100 years have been incredible, and I would say those changes and improvements have been accelerating in the last 50 years. Since I've been involved, we had no idea of using genetic markers. Really, I think people were thinking about ways of using genetic markers in the 70s and 80s, but it's only in the last 30 years that they've really been introduced into breeding as a routine, allowing us to select plants based on leaf analysis at a very, very early seedling stage.
Wow.
So with all of that
incredible.
in mind, like it's really incredible. I'm sitting here with my chin a little bit on the floor. I don't know a great deal about breeding, as such. And I just find it absolutely fascinating, how far, let's just the tomato has come. And, the ability to be able to grow at home and commercially, of course, with less disease, more pest resistance, better for the climate and that kind of thing. I just think it's amazing. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons also why so many people just absolutely love growing tomatoes. It's like a real joy to grow, and the fragrance of them and the look of them and everything.
It's so nostalgic as well.
Yeah, there's just something about the tomato, isn't there? I can always remember my uncle. He had a real beaten up old greenhouse, and he used to grow it full of tomatoes. I mean, there wasn't window panes in some of the greenhouse, but nevertheless, he used to grow tons of tomatoes in there. And the smell of the tomatoes just brings back those memories from being a child. And I know that that's very true for many people. It's just, it's one of those crops, isn't it? That I don't know, like you said, it's nostalgic for so many ways, but it's come so far. So I'm kind of like wondering now, what would you say is perhaps, I know you mentioned one variety already, but what's the most famous tomato or the most well-known or well-loved tomato in the UK at the moment?
Which might not be the best flavoured, of course.
Yeah. It might not be the best to grow either.
I think we know where this is going.
It might not be the best flavour or the best to grow, or it might not be the most attractive. But what do you think is the most famous one now?
That's a very interesting question. And it's so difficult to give one or even two varieties. But sadly, I would have to say that one of the still the most famous varieties in this country, in the UK, is Moneymaker, and it's a variety that has that 50 gram, 2 to 3 ounce fruit, which quite heavy yielding, but no disease resistance, no significant flavour, and yet it's been.
I don't know why that's hilarious. The most popular one is the most awful one.
Yeah, well, people have found it to be reliable, I suppose.
It's the recognition as well. Yeah,
at least in the greenhouse, Michael. Yeah, and so it is unfortunate, but I mean, I think there are. I remember speaking to Arthur Billett. I don't know whether any of your listeners will remember Arthur, but he was he did do Gardener's World for a while, and was quite a famous garden writer. And his favourite was Alicante, which was kind of a development on Moneymaker, which again is still grown, is quite popular as a standard fruit. But I think people have realised that one of the great advantages of growing your own tomatoes is that you can get a fully ripened, fully flavoured tomato. In other words, the ripening process is completed, and you get all of those delightful aromatics and flavours within the fruit. And of course, I don't need to tell you, Michael, because Thompson and Morgan introduced it, but Sungold probably now is one of the varieties that is most talked about. And I'm guessing now it's probably 25, 30 years since that was introduced. Bred by Takita in Japan. But it's one of it set, if you like, it set the bar for sweetness and taste. We recently introduced Honeycomb, which is a rival for Sungold, and cracks a little bit less. If Sungold has an issue, it's that fruit tends to crack. But then the other fruit, the other variety that is quite often talked about is Gardener's Delight. So I've already spoken about 4, and we could probably go on for another hour talking about these varieties. But Gardener's Delight, again, it's a 70-year-old variety. It was introduced in 1950, and it was used by Marks and Spencer for a while when there was this problem with the flavour of supermarket tomatoes was really poor. And Lord Seif at the time was chairman of Marks and Spencer, and he sent forth his team to find a better flavoured tomato.
Really?
They started to develop Gardener's Delight as a supermarket tomato with the help of Y College. Bernard Sparks was the grower involved at the time. And they took that variety and commercialised it. But people still grow Gardener's Delight today. But unfortunately, Gardener's Delight, sometimes it is Gardener's Delight in the packet and sometimes it isn't. So unfortunately, people don't always get what they were hoping to get, I have to say. But the original Gardener's Delight is still available. It was a German variety, Gartenfreude. And you can still get the original stock. But I think there have been improvements. But we should perhaps move on, unless we end up just talking about varieties. But one last variety I just would like to, because it's one of ours. It's Crimson Crush, and that is a variety that was introduced really because of some comments and discussions that were had, comments that were made by and discussions were had with Sutton's Seeds down in Torquay about blight and the requirement for blight resistance in tomatoes for outdoor growing in this country. And last year, Which Gardening did a survey and did a members trial with Crimson Crush, and 96% of people reported no kind of blight on the plants at all, and again 96% of people were happy with the flavour. So that was a really pleasing result out of 700 people who did the trial. So that was quite an interesting response.
That's amazing. And pretty much all of the varieties you've mentioned, I have actually grown. And more recently was honeycomb. And I think genuinely I enjoyed the flavour of that much more. Garden's Delight, Moneymaker, I've done those in the past, and I've never, yes, probably reliable, sure. But taste-wise, not so much, which is interesting that people still grow those, because as home growers we always go on about how homegrown tomatoes taste the best, but then we pick the ones that don't taste the best, so that's really random. This year I'm growing Tigerella, and last year I grew a really lovely...
That's such an old one,
but it looks
there's bound
so
to be better
good.
ones.
It looks so good. A little dark purple ones where the top looks like a bit of like a star, and I can't think the name of it.
I think the black ones are a bit intriguing. But it's hard to know when they're ripe, isn't it? The black ones.
I think the black ones have more antioxidants in as well, so that's why I tried that. And it was black, but the top looks like a little star, and I just cannot remember the name.
That's cool.
Hello everyone, my name is Kirsty Ward, sometimes better known as My Little Allotment, and you're joining me today on my allotment so I can give you a little tour round. I can let you know what's going on, all the good things that are growing, all the things that are going wrong, and any problems that I'm facing on the allotment, and just some of my top tips to keeping your allotment healthy and flourishing. So we're going to start with the tomatoes. They are now growing rapidly. With the fact that it's lovely and hot, they obviously are thriving, but you just need to make sure that they're watered regularly and that you feed them at least once a week to help them produce those flowers and fruit. The other thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that you're pinching out the side shoots. Now, the side shoots are the shoots that grow diagonally, and they are in between the stem and the branches, and they're the ones that grow in between the stems and the branches. You need to make sure you're pinching them out, because then this directs all the energy into growing the flowers and the fruit, which is what we want. Currently in this bed with the tomatoes, I've got lots of radish growing and beetroot and lettuce. You want to make sure that you're sowing your radish and lettuce maybe once a week, so you get sort of a successional harvest of crops. I've also got some aubergines that are growing outside that are doing really, really well. They are flowering at the moment. So hopefully the pollinators are coming over to pollinate those. I've noticed that the broad beans are ready to be harvested. So I'll probably harvest those at the end of today. If we get a really good glut, I'll probably freeze some of those. We've got some lovely Swiss chard stems and leaves that are ready to take off, and a couple of beetroot as well. The potatoes are growing really well. These are Maine potatoes. They're starting to flower, so I'm sure they'll probably start dying back over the next few weeks, and then we'll look at harvesting them. Now, something that hasn't grown great this year are my onions. I found that I think it might be to do with the weather. Well, that's what I'm going to blame it on anyway. But they've just not swelled up as much as I wanted them to. I've still got some smaller onions, so I'm going to harvest those, chop them all up. So I'll get like maybe a lunchbox full, and then I'm going to freeze them into portions to use. We have some lovely herbs flowering. The nasturtiums are growing really well, and hopefully those nasturtium plants in all of my beds will help take away all of the nasty bugs, because they're normally used as a sort of sacrificial plant, which is a really good thing to have. They're also edible, the leaves, the flowers and the seeds as well, you can make poor man's capers with, so they're a really versatile plant. The strawberries have now more or less finished. They're starting to put out some side shoots, so I will be planting up those side shoots to make extra free strawberry plants. And of course the courgettes are going crazy, and I'm pretty sure probably in another couple of days' time I'll have too many courgettes and I might have to start stocking Tesco's.
Before we move on to talking a little bit about a tomato or two that changed the world, and we'll also touch on that Chelsea display, I just want to touch on like sun gold, and I also want to kind of give a revelation that I hate tomatoes because I grew up hating the acidity in tomatoes. You know, a limp piece of tomato in a sandwich is just to me the worst nightmare. Orange, unripe tomatoes that you buy in the supermarket for this general use are horrible, horrible, horrible. I will eat sun gold straight from the plant. It's one of the only tomatoes I will really touch because it's very sweet. And I just want you to explain to our listeners Brix content, what that is, how it's measured, and basically all around kind of sweetness, and how sun gold indeed compares to a usual acidic tomato that I would spit out of a sandwich.
Yeah, Brix, the Brix readings are a way of expressing soluble solids within a liquid, and that's measured using two prisms, a refractometer. So the light comes through the prism and it's deflected by the soluble solids that are in there and gives a kind of a reading, which can be anything between, depending on what you're measuring, if it's a tomato, it might be between sort of 3 or 4 and 12. And if it was a melon, it might go up as high as 17, 18. And so it's just a way of expressing soluble solids, but most people would take that as a way of measuring sugars, but, you know, both essentially fructose in the case of tomatoes, essentially fructose, and there might be some sucrose in there as well. But it's just a way of numerically guiding people as to the actual level of sugar within that fruit. But of course, Michael, there's a lot more to it than that, because you've got all these other elements of flavour. Sometimes it might be a sort of a smokiness, or more of an almondy flavour, or it might be sourness, which you've just expressed your dislike of, because certainly that's high in fruit. But a standard tomato might be around about 5, a mark of 5 on the Brix scale, whereas your favourite sun gold would be more than double that, somewhere maybe around 12 or 13. So huge difference in levels of sugar.
So we want to ask you a little bit about that Chelsea display, though, with the different tomatoes that changed the world. I know that was a bit of a year and a half ago, because we took a while to get you on the podcast, but just run us through that display if you can, please.
Yeah, I'd been approached by Bill Alexander, the author of 10 Tomatoes That Changed the World, for some background on one of our varieties that he featured in one of the chapters, Big Boy. We had various conversations and some text went backwards and forwards between us. And I just thought this was a wonderful idea for a display, and to take this story of the tomato to Chelsea, because in 2021 it happened to be a September timing, which meant it would be a lot easier to grow tomatoes, to get them ready in time. And so I we'd been working very closely with Chris Smith at Pennard Plants. And I said to Chris, did he think this was an interesting idea for an exhibit? And after sort of gasping and saying, "Oh no, not another one, Simon," he said, "Yeah, that was a good idea." So I went back to Bill and Bill Alexander and said, "Look, we've got this idea. Would it be okay if we took this idea, because this was before the book was published, and did an exhibit?" And Bill said, "Yeah, fine." He was quite honoured that we'd taken this as an inspiration. And so we took these 10 tomatoes and then we kind of versioned it so that we put in a variety that would be an example. And if a variety had been upgraded, or if we couldn't find the variety, because, for example, Colonel Johnson's bucket variety, we had no clue what it was. So we put a modern variety in of a tasty tomato. San Marzano, we couldn't really find an alternative. And one of Bill's chapters was on Florida green ripes. Again, it was this story of the loss of flavor in the tomato. The Americans were growing tomatoes in Florida, harvesting them green, putting them in boxes and shipping them north to sell in supermarkets before they were fully developed. The tomato, I think, was completely degraded by that activity. But, things have changed again. People have, woken up to the fact that, this isn't a good way of growing and producing tomatoes. So changes have taken place. Another chapter was done with the Heinz, on the Heinz tomato. We grew one of Heinz's tomatoes there as an example of ketchup soup grown tomatoes. The Heinz company had based its reputation originally on pickles, gherkins, but then the bottom dropped out of the pickle market, believe it or not, at the end of the 19th century. And so Mr. Heinz had to think of another crop that he could grow and process. And that's where ketchup came from. And so, again, it's detailed in Bill's book, this whole remarkable story. And Heinz set up their own breeding program to breed tomatoes that would ripen together pretty much at the same time, so they could be harvested mechanically. They had good disease resistance, and they would make great ketchup. Wow. And so that was another variety. And then we also wanted to grow an example of King Umberto, a modern example. So we picked on our Nagina, which is a blight-resistant plum tomato, like King Umberto, which is the tomato that the Italians would normally have used to put on pizza. And then Fiascella, which is the tomato that was mostly used for spaghetti sauces. We chose a variety called Romello, which we actually put in the display as because it was. I developed it in the late 2010s with a friend, John.
John.
Yeah.
John. We all know John.
Yes. John Burrows. Yeah, with John Burrows. Sorry, I was just thinking about that. John sadly died in 2021 in May, and so we grew the Romello as a kind of a memorial to John. And this variety is sold in the United States as Fantastico, and this was a small plum that kind of, again, it gave the impression, the idea of this variety, but it had heavier yield than the original Fiascetta, and it had more blight resistance, so people could grow it at home and they could grow it in a large container.
Wow.
And so those are a few examples from the 10 tomatoes, but we didn't. I don't think we went through all 10, but we have to keep people hanging on there to see if they
give people a reason to buy the book.
I know what, yes, exactly. Which we'll talk about the book as well. I think it's got to the time where we should most definitely talk about tips for growing them at home. So do you have 3 top tips to give home growers for growing tomatoes?
Yeah, I do. I think the most important thing is really making sure that your tomato plants have got plenty of light. I know it's a very obvious thing, but, you think these plants came from, high altitude Mexico, high altitude Colombia, Ecuador, very high light levels. So this plant naturally likes a lot of light. So don't plant it in a shaded greenhouse if you can avoid it, or don't put it in a shady spot. Make sure you maximize the light. And the other aspect of growing any tomato variety is this idea of consistent watering and feeding, because if you're not keeping the plants moist and well fed, this is when you run into problems with blossom end rot, this problem with calcium nutrition, which results in this blackening necrosis at the bottom of the fruit. And I know it's more and more difficult now. I've been speaking to people at length at Chelsea and also at Gardeners World Live, Michael. I don't know, you might want to comment on, I know it's not the interview with you, but you might want to comment on the content of growing media and finding the right growing media today that's reliable and consistent, because you can get a grow bag. I know what I use, and I don't know whether it's okay to mention about, you can cut it out if you don't, but I've been using Melcourt's, large grow bags, and I've found them to be pretty good. I'm sure there are others as well, but
no, it's good to know what a professional recommends as well. And to be honest, Ellen is the one growing more tomatoes than me, so she's probably more able to comment at this point.
I think it's been an interesting experiment over the past probably 4 or 5 years, trying different mediums, trying the peat-free mediums as well. I usually make up a mix myself, which may be a mixture of a peat-free compost that I have been gifted mostly, and with some homegrown compost. I feed when needed with a seaweed feed, if and when needed. I have suffered from blossom end rot, which was interesting because I have grown tomatoes for at least 15 plus years. And the only time I got blossom end rot was 4 years ago. And it was the first time I'd used a peat-free medium, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know if that was just the year, like it could have been so many different reasons that happened, but I'd never had it before. So since then, I tend to use some kind of peat-free compost. I mean, I've used all kinds of different ones, so names are irrelevant here, really. Do you know what I mean? As in brands, because I've used lots of them, and my tomatoes have always been just fine. But I feed with a seaweed feed, and the thing I have struggled with mostly, you were saying about light over the last few years, is actually my greenhouse or my allotment is now partly shaded by a huge big apple tree, and my tomatoes don't get as much light as they were in previous years. And so I am now struggling for that. And this year is the first year I put them outside to see. I always grow them in the greenhouse, but this year they're all outside because I want to see if that's going to make a difference. And they're actually in a mix of multi-purpose compost that has been mulched with a plant-based mulch, which was last autumn. Okay. So yeah, I basically tried a million different ways to grow tomatoes, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Ellen, that you say that, because my other tip is, make sure if you're growing outside, if you can possibly use blight-resistant varieties, and there's quite a selection available now, please do so. And also, on your allotment, if you can get your allotment group together, and try, if you can, to get some kind of agreement that and I know this is very difficult, but if you can get everyone to grow as much as possible blight-resistant tomatoes and potatoes, it will reduce the disease load within the allotment. And now, I know that's a challenge, but I really think it's an important thing that people could take on board that would help reduce disease on the whole of the allotment.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. I have had tomato blight before. I don't get it regularly, thankfully, because they're mainly in the greenhouse. I guess that protects them as well. But our potato blight we've had on our allotments for a few years, actually. But a lot of people at the allotments do buy their potatoes and tomato plants as well, where we have like a little community hub. And that's actually a really important point that I could definitely mention to them, because, you know, there's nothing more disappointing, is there, than having blight just and you can watch sweep across the allotment. It's quite incredible. But to actually go right back to the beginning, if the majority of people are actually buying their potatoes or tomatoes from the community hub, to actually be thinking about blight resistant varieties, that's a really, really good idea. So I think that's a great tip for other people who listeners for this podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
Lots of gardeners and allotmenteers that listen as well. So it's a really good idea, and I'm definitely going to mention that. And I have my fingers crossed this year for my first tomatoes outside ever that we don't get blight. So watch this space.
Cool. This is such a great chat, Simon. Honestly, I've got one final question though, before we need to say goodbye. Is the future of tomatoes? Where is it going next? More sweetness, different colours. You also kind of mentioned a little bit about the medicinal values as well. Is there some movement there? Kind of, where is the industry of breeding tomatoes gonna go next?
Yeah, I think flavour is going to be an important criterion for the home garden tomato. It must be. So improving flavour across all types, improving texture, so maybe not quite so, for better one, a better adjective, not squishy, but probably a little firmer, and thinking about the variety of colours that we have. I know that the stripe variety Shimmer, we did some taste testing at Gardens World Live, and people just love Shimmer. It has such a special flavour, and it has a good texture. But then we look at, you know, whether we can have high beta carotene tomato as a way of adding another, you know, antioxidant in something different to carrot. And orange tomatoes can have two carotenoids. They can have beta carotene, or they can have a kind of lycopene called prolycopene, which is more easily metabolized than the standard red lycopene. It's a version of lycopene produced in some orange tomatoes. And that's also another very good antioxidant. So improving and understanding those bioactive molecules, if for want of a better term, within tomato fruit and other fruits like peppers, I think is really valuable. And so I think that's where things are going. I think we need more disease resistance for the home gardener. We need to think about drought resistance, I think. You know, all this talk about the water problems at the moment, Michael, you know, I mean, it's, you know, should we be able to plant our tomatoes on the allotment and you know, trust that they're going to just, you know, get on with growing and producing fruit without too much irrigation? I think that's something we need to think about.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, what I have to just ask you before we close up, what about tickling tomatoes? We haven't mentioned tickling tomatoes yet. Sometimes in my greenhouse, I have had to tickle my tomatoes.
That is a thing.
It's very good. Yes, if you do a bit of tickling, you might have a better result. Yes.
This has been a real pleasure chatting with you. Before we finish up, tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, the book, the author of the 10 Tomatoes that Changed the World is Bill Alexander. It was published in the June 2022. And I'm pretty sure it's available, certainly through online bookshop, but in other bookshops, it's available. It's published by the Grand Central Publishing in the United States. It's got very much a US angle, but it's a really fun read, and I would recommend, you know, anyone who's interested in gardening, cooking, the history of food. I would recommend getting a copy and reading it. It's a very easy read.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I think we will definitely, when we put out this episode, put a link somewhere to get the book or to have a look at it as well, because that sounds really cool. This has been super enjoyable. I don't eat a ton of tomatoes. I gift them a lot because they give me a little bit of acid reflux, if I'm honest. But you cannot beat the flavour of a good tomato, and also just they're part of growing, aren't they? If you're a gardener, you have to grow tomatoes one way or another. Hanging baskets,
and many people's first thing that they grow.
Yeah, greenhouse, wherever you grow them, you have to grow some tomatoes. So thank you very much. It's been really pleasurable chatting with you, learning about the history of Burpee and tomatoes in general. And we'll let you get back to your big red round fruits.
Thank you very much, Ellen.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Good to speak to you both.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name's Michael Holland. I'm a freelance nature educator, and I'm the author of the books I Ate Sunshine for Breakfast, Smart Animals, and Jungle in Your Living Room. And I've recently written a selection of articles for Gardener's World Online. I'm on the RHS Education Committee, and I love all aspects of the natural world and how it links to our lives. My focus today is a spicy little plant project that began back in January. I love chilies and other hot spices in my food, and I was browsing chili seeds on a website called Spices on the Web. And as us plant lovers often do, I got a little bit carried away and I ordered about 20 different varieties. I propagated them in homemade newspaper pots with the help of a reptile heat map beneath them. With over 100 little pots, we did end up with an almost plague of the wretched fungus gnats in the living room, which we eventually controlled with sticky yellow traps and a penguin killer carnivorous plant. I lovingly pricked out these chili seedlings in April into larger pots and then into their final location at the front of our house, which receives a lot of sunlight throughout the day. Only planting them with finished compost from my heap, compost bin, and wormery. I've displayed them on a symmetrical arrangement of upturned and stacked plastic bread crates and mixed in a few aubergine and tomato plants amongst them. They're all doing fairly well and have begun to flower during a heat wave of mid-June. Once a week I add an organic fertiliser to their water, made out of stingy nettles, comfrey, seaweed, coffee, 1 or 2 banana skins, and a small porous bag of finished rich compost. It stinks, but seems to be good for the plants. Rather infuriatingly, despite my geekiness of keeping them all meticulously labelled from sowing until planting out, the final labels, which I fashioned from plastic milk bottles and labelled with permanent pen, have all faded in that hot sun. So I'm kicking myself a little, to be honest. I'll certainly recognise some of them when they fruit: the purple jalapeno, the padron pepper, and the naga butt jolokia chilies. The rest I'll have to refer back to the website where I bought the seeds for identification. It'll be kind of like a chili roulette otherwise. So now for a little about the wonderful world of chili. They're in the Solanaceae family, along with tomatoes, aubergines, physalis, tobacco, mandrake, petunias, and many more, and potatoes. Chilies are in the capsicum genus, and around 40 million tons of them alone are being produced annually. Very, very popular spice. The hottest part of the chili is not the seeds, as many people think, but the white flesh that houses the seeds, known as the placenta. And when you eat a chili and feel that heat, it's a perceived burning caused by the lingering flavour of the capsaicin molecule, which has a long chemical tail which sticks to your taste buds. This also occurs when you eat ginger, cinnamon and turmeric, and black pepper as well. Real actual physical burning and blistering of the mouth can take place when we eat spicy foods such as horseradish, mustard and wasabi due to the presence of sulphur. So there we are. Variety really is the spice of life. Or is it the other way around? Thanks and happy growing. Come to my stand.
Plant-based podcast gossip live from GLEE with the GLEE ambassador Michael Perry.
Will you come to my stand, please?
What's your stand?
It's the Future Plants. It's at the entrance to Hall 6. Although there's many entrances to Hall 6.
So how will we know what one it is?
I don't know. You'll find it. You'll find it as a plant beacon.
On the gossip today, we also have Kirsty, my little allotment. Hi, Kirsty.
Hello, Ellen. And Michael, the brand ambassador for GLEE.
We keep introducing him.
Honestly,
The brand
like,
ambassador for GLEE.
it's like when you've got an older aunt and they're always like still referring to something you did when you're like 6 years old or something. It's like, that's what you girls are like. You need to see me in new eyes. Now I'm the ambassador.
But we can't.
Was that audible, me slapping Ellen on the arm? Anyway, welcome. Hiya.
Can you tell us about GLEE and your role as ambassador?
No, it's in all seriousness. It's been a wonderful show. I'm putting together a future plant stand, so you see 40 brand new plants, or plants you might not have thought of listing in your retail store previously. I also oversaw the talent store, indoor and outdoor displays. If you've seen those, they're the ones with love of colour blocking. The other one is an immersive experience, which is like being inside an insect house as well.
That's cool.
Which is really cool. And this was a group of, not necessarily students, but people from garden centres, all different ages, all different levels, that then put together these stands, and it's incredible. And I think that, in a way, we've been talking about inclusivity at the show, and that is one of the most inclusive areas, because it's bringing people that are not part of the industry and giving them a platform here at GLEE. So that has been fab.
That's cool.
I'm also on the stage later. We're doing an inclusivity chat as well, where I will talk about not just necessarily LGBT kind of differences, but also kind of class and age differences and kind of knowledge kind of difficulties that I've had over the years, where you kind of, sometimes people don't take you seriously unless you know how to prune 20 different shrubs, you know, kind of the barrier, the kind of knowledge barrier that we sometimes have in the industry as well. And we're doing 2-minute sales. I'm talking about marketing and all that jazz, really.
Well, you're a busy bee, aren't you?
Misses. But yeah, it's really cool to be representing GLEE, because last year I came for the first time in 20 years, and I really was astounded at how much it had moved on and how much there was to learn here, and how it puts a brilliant spotlight on our industry, because I think inclusivity is about putting a spotlight on the industry and how many different roles and jobs there are here, because it's not just about the obvious stuff like being a landscape gardener. It's also about, you might be writing copy, or you might be product developing, or it's so broad. It's amazing.
What are you doing here, Miss Kirsty?
Miss Kirsty.
Just going on to what you're saying there as well,
Yeah.
Michael, I think like it's really changed. I've been coming here since 2018, and it's like really moved forward, and there's a lot more social media going on here, and like brands using social media to showcase their new products, and like influencers and things like that. So it's definitely moving forward, which is really nice. But I'm here as myself, my little allotment, but I'm also here as I help run social media for Rocket Grow, which is really cool. So I'm here to get lots of content and showcase their new products and stuff, which is really fun.
But Kirsty, we said this earlier, you're old school Instagram, because you were kind of in the first wave, and you've probably seen newer faces come into Instagram, and so you're kind of, you're working a kind of different role, because I feel like you're a lot more established in some ways. So you must have seen a real change in kind of the marketplace, right?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I am a bit old school Instagram and social media, and I probably don't do as many of the trends as like the new people.
But you don't necessarily have to. Everyone does what feels right for them.
Yeah. I love being on social media, and I love talking about obviously my allotment and gardening for mental health and well-being, and how to grow your own, and just showcasing that everyone can grow your own. And it's just really fun to come somewhere like this, and people like know who you are and come to talk to you about the things that you do and the products that you like, because they know that you've been using some of these products for years, and it's good to have like that knowledge on them.
Wow.
Let me tell you a story about GLEE. So years ago I came to GLEE. This is how much it has moved on, I came in to do the social media for GLEE in one of the early days of them using social media.
In the 60s?
In the 60s. So this is quite
How old are you?
This is quite some years back. And I got absolutely lambasted for taking a photograph of somebody's
got
stand.
absolutely levered.
Well, actually, what happened yesterday was I went to take some photos of Michael's stand and got told off by the security because it's
I told
no
him
photos.
about that this morning. I said this was heavy-handed, guys.
But obviously, the thing is that we're here for media. Like, we're here to showcase new products. And I think, as long as we ask permission of the people that are, showcasing their new products, whether we can take photos and use them, like, I think that should be available, because we're the ones that will push those products out before they come onto the market for people that are actually gardening. For them, the people that will actually use it to see.
But there's so much. There is more of that now. Do you know what I mean? The people are happier with that compared to what it was a few years ago. Oh my gosh! Like, it literally shook me. It shook me to my core. It was so awful, and he was so angry. This guy, like, he kind of charged at me, and really, I was like, but I'm told this is what I'm here to do, like, by GLEE kind of thing. It was horrible.
But I guess you
it
could
has
see
changed a lot.
Yeah, but you can also see with sometimes you're seeing a real sneak peek of new products, so they do want to really protect, the identity of stuff as well. So you can see where that's coming from sometimes.
I think we need to be more open than that by now. By the time the product's developed and here at GLEE, then if someone else wants to develop a similar product, they've got to catch up, haven't they? It'll go on the shelf, and if someone wants to copy it, they will. By the time you've got to GLEE with your products, you're done. You're there. So I don't know, but I mean, we've moved on in times now, haven't we? So it's really nice, like you said, Kirsty, to see brands that want to work with influencers and media. Things have changed, and they recognise now that that's a great way to get their product out there.
What have been your highlights, Ellen Mary?
I haven't been here very long.
No, you haven't, because it's a long way from Norfolk, isn't it?
We had this big discussion last night. It was only going to take me 2.5 hours to get here, and Michael's like, no, you're coming from Norfolk, it's miles away. I bet you £4.50 you won't be here before 10:30. Well, of course I was here before 10:30.
10:27 or something,
10:14 to be precise. But nevertheless, when I came in, one of the first things I saw was some fair trade birdhouses. Did you see them? Insect houses and birdhouses, all made fair trade. I think in Sri Lanka, but it's all and it was so cool, and they're so pretty, and I really like those. So that's really cool. And we are sitting on the Zest stand.
I've been astounded by their product range.
Yeah. We've had Zest on the podcast before, actually. So there was a discount code for podcast listeners, and they've extended their range this year. So they've got more grow your own stuff. Yeah. There is a bar that could also be a potting bench. I am massively taken by that.
I said to them, you could use it in the morning for coffee. Yeah. You could use it all day as a potting bench, then in the evening as well.
It is awesome. So there's a ton of stuff here which I love Zest, and we're sitting here on a bench underneath a arbor, really nice, and you can't hear anything. It's So honestly, I haven't actually done much else since I've been here.
But you could imagine this if you've got if you're in an urban area, this will kind of give you that real privacy, but also kind of that avoiding
really
noise
nice.
Pollution. Okay, well, since you only just arrived, Kirsty and I will give you a few tips of what to look out for. You can go first, Kirsty.
Yeah, I think it's really important to go to some of the stands to look for their new products, and the teams are so helpful. They will showcase all of their new products to you. There's some brochures to take home. Definitely go over and visit. I really enjoyed Zest. They've got some really nice products. Obviously love the new products that Rocket Grow are launching, and I think it's just a lovely show, and people are really helpful. It's a big show though, so wear your comfy shoes and drink lots of water.
I didn't do that yesterday. But I would say there's really cool. There's a company called Freckle Face that do wax melts, and they've got a new RHS range, and they can do bespoke fragrances as well. So that's a nice development. Grass Gains, who are from Nottingham area, they're doing really cool lawn fertilizers, and I love all the promo around that as well. Also, Grow So Simple. They've got these new pods where you can grow almost like Lego style, build up and grow herbs on the wall at home with lights above it as well. That's pretty cool.
I need to go and see them.
Right over there by the main stage, where I'll be in a few hours for a while as well. What else have I seen?
Also, Shell on Earth are here this year, and they do a great shell plant topper. It's obviously a really great mulch, and it retains all the moisture in the pots and containers and stuff, and they're great, and they're a local UK brand, and they're here, and they're just so lovely. Definitely go and visit those.
I did not know.
That's reminded me, Lava Light as well. I've seen Lava Light with your face on the wall too.
Oh yeah, the videos there on Lava Light, so check them out. But also Shell on Earth, I just want to mention, do you know their story about, because they sell whelks, this seafood, and it's all sold to Korea. And so all of their whelks are exported to Korea, the meat, but then the shells they then crush up and obviously then use to plant with bulbs and as mulch. But isn't that amazing? Two different sides of the world, this piece of seafood is used. It's just
that's not very vegan.
Yeah.
But it's also really good at
I thought they were going to reclassify seafood. I read that last, I'm sure.
It's also good that they're making use of their product and not just using it as waste.
Likewise with the wool companies.
Yeah.
Horty Wool, for example, using wool for different purposes, which is then completely what do you call it, 0 miles or something, because you're not then bringing something from overseas for here. So the innovation out there in the last few years, and as an old school Instagrammer, Kirsty, I think you've seen this as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many more companies that are trying to be sustainable,
and
that
circular
are from the UK, and that are carbon neutral, and I think all of these things are really important in the gardening industry, which is great to see.
And also even in our time, Ellen Mary, so many new companies that have started within the last 8 years, 8 or 9 years, and it's real, and there's so much new energy out there as well. I think we've been going through a golden moment for horticulture for at least 5 years now. I'm so pumped.
We can tell you are.
I know. Woo. So where are you going to head this afternoon, Ellen Mary, now you've had all of the advice from Kirsty?
I would like to see your new plants,
future plants
at the front. I want to visit Rocket Grow because I know that their composts have been developed quite a lot, haven't they, over the last year or more? So I'm really interested to go and see those. Who was the other one you just said was over there? Who I said you said right by
Grow So Simple.
Grow So Simple.
Lava Light 2 Hawes.
I've seen Lava
Hawes
Light.
watering cans.
Oh yeah, they are amazing. I actually won a competition to go down to build my own watering can in their factory in September, and now I can't go because I've got to do some work on that day. So I have been. I went over and said, yeah, maybe I can come another day, and they've said yes. So I'm really excited. So I'll get to make my own watering can. Like that would be awesome.
Amazing.
Cool. I want to go.
How exciting. Horticulture is cool. You know, the industry is buzzing
Oh my God,
right now.
have you played the game? You know Homegrown with the Haydens?
Yes.
She's so nice, isn't she? I love her.
She's lovely.
Met her first time yesterday, and we played the raking game on the AIM stand. You rake the leaves, and you have to do it in a record time, and it's a way of promoting their brand new rake. And I was like really cocky. I did it mega quick. And then she comes along and shows a really different method. And she like drags it long. I was like, drag, and she was like, drag.
Yeah, just drag it.
And she beat my time, honestly.
Yeah.
Go girls.
Oh. She's on the way to winning an Amazon voucher as well.
Yeah, I think I might head over and give that a
Have a
go
little
then.
look as
Yeah,
well.
I'm going to make sure I use all those tips that you've just given me.
Go long, Kirsty.
Go long or go home.
But all the hoi polloi here, Skinny Jean Gardener, Veg Grower Pod, Green Fingers was here yesterday. Green Finger City Boy.
City Boy.
I never remember his name.
I thought you have a bromance with Adam.
I don't.
You totally
your
do.
videos.
He's just
Yeah.
really sweet and uncomplicated. So I like him.
Uncomplicated.
And
Yeah,
who else was here
amazing.
yesterday? Oh, Kate is here. Kate, you know Kate who designed the
Mason.
doodah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's designed the eBay stand here.
I am floored by her plant knowledge. She's a real plant geek.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, she is fab.
She can join your little crew.
Ah, honestly, she's just amazing.
Yeah, she's ace.
And what she created over at the eBay stand is like,
Lovely.
it's just like you wouldn't think you could have such resilient plants in that purple border in
Right.
such a colour palette. But it's inspiring. It's
She
really
loves
inspiring.
purple, basically.
Yeah.
She loves
Yeah,
purple. So
she's
there's
dressed
always
in purple
purplish,
today, yeah.
reddish
I
plants.
absolutely love the stand that you created for the stage at BBC Gardeners World. That
Yeah.
was so beautiful.
Yeah, it was fab, wasn't it?
Really nice.
All the purple, black and white. She just loves it. I'm looking forward to seeing her, actually. Hopefully I catch her at some point today.
Yeah,
So there you go. That's our synopsis of GLEE, basically. I hope you all felt like you were here with us.
Yeah, definitely. It's been really, really fun. And yeah, still a lot to go as well.
Yeah.
So,
And I think you need to show me and Ellen around your
yeah,
stand
we
now.
should go there now, actually.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's go there now.
All right, we're going to do that. Bye, everyone. Series 12 of the Plant-Based Podcast is sponsored by People Plants Wellbeing, the nature-based wellness studio where you can find your magic through the power of plants and nature. Take 10% off all services, treatments, and retreats with our exclusive discount code for you, our podcast listeners. Use code PBP Series 12 via the website or when you contact the team to book. Next wellness days are coming up soon. Find out more and book your place at peopleplantswellbeing.com or on Instagram at peopleplantswellbeing.
The music for the Plant-Based Podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.